Good day, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second part of Level Up CX Summit 2020-2021. The second part being called Make Better CX Decisions and Convert Customers with Data Science. If you are a returning CX Summit alumni, having joined us for the first one and now the second one, welcome back. If you're joining us for the first time, it's fantastic to have you here. My name is Anthony. I am the host and admin for today. And I'm going to introduce our speakers in a moment, but perhaps a little bit of context for today. So let's start with the question. How is your new normal working out for you and your business? So we're obviously living through a once in a generation time in history. And what we've seen is that businesses are really wrestling to understand the new customer mindset, try to anticipate customers' next moves, and basically regain what they've lost during this period. So in response, what we've done is we've designed a series of events, and we've invited thought leaders from around the world to help us in presenting a blueprint for CX in the new economy. So last month we actually kicked off with the opening keynote with Leo Arussi last month, and that was called Score 100% for CX in the 90% economy. And we also introduced customer journey management at that point. Today, we obviously looking at making better CX decisions and converting customers with data science. Next month, we are going to be looking at the marketing role of the CX professional. And finally, we're going to be wrapping it up in late January with, we're going to be pulling it all together with acquisition, retention, and optimization in journey management. There are golden threads that run through this entire series, so we encourage you to join us for as many of these as you possibly can. If you have not yet seen the content from previous events or seen the opportunity to register for those that are coming, we'll make sure that you have those in your inbox shortly. A little bit of housekeeping before I introduce our speakers. Like many of you, we are sitting in our homes, so please be understanding if you hear dogs or children or something like that. Our roadmap for today is our speakers are going to be discussing the topic at hand, and then we're going to pause towards the end and we're going to have a chance for Q&A. So if you do have some questions that you would like us to try and address, please get them through to us and we'll try hard to address them in real time. Otherwise, we will address them after the fact. And please stick around. We will make sure that you receive the material, the slideware, as well as the recording for today's session. So on that note, I would like to introduce our speakers. Firstly, we are thrilled to be joined today by Alasdair Douglas from our partner in Australia, Servian. Alasdair, why don't you introduce yourself quick?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Alasdair. I've been working with Servian for a little over 5 years now. I've done all kinds of things with Servian in the realm of data, including engineering, but my focus is actually on machine learning and data science, and I run our data science practice here.
Great, and it's got a very cool title. Thanks, Alasdair. And our CEO and co-founder, Mike Renzon. Mike?
Great, thanks, Anthony. Well, Anthony has already introduced me. I'm the CEO and co-founder of inQuba. inQuba, we just hit 10 years old, so we've been focusing on customer experience management and journey management for a decade now. Prior to that, I had 10 to 15 years of experience in customer experience management, but it was really in digital channels, e-commerce, and the call center industry. Also want to just thank Alasdair. The audience never really knows exactly what time zone we're working in, but we kicked off actually at 4 a.m. this morning was my early wake up. We had the same webinar that we're running now for our Australian customer base. We kicked off at 5 a.m., but it's Alasdair's chance to do the late night shift. It's just at 1 a.m. in Sydney, and Alasdair, thanks so much for not only joining us and running this with us, but doing it at pretty late at night or early in the morning, I'd say. So thank you, Alasdair.
No worries, I thought it makes sense.
Thanks, guys. So I'm excited to hear what we're going to talk about today, and I'm going to step out of the conversation now, and I'm going to hand over to you, Mike.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Anthony. So The reason we chose this topic of data science and machine learning is that we're seeing the nature of the problems that we have to solve, particularly in let's call it a post-COVID or post-lockdown type of environment. And the primary request and interest that we're getting from our customer base has really shifted from this idea of how are we doing at a particular point, which is let's say the Net Promoter Score or the customer satisfaction question, to why are our customers doing what they're doing. And the secret and the answer to why customers are doing what they're doing lies in data. So we've seen such a ramp up, particularly over the course of 2020, in understanding the depth of the data to provide these kinds of answers, and that's really what we're going to be talking about. So I have a background in computer science, but that was a long time ago, and one of the courses that we did do was artificial intelligence and machine learning, and I have a confession to make that I understood the material, but I never really understood the application when I studied it. And I've always kind of wrestled with some of the basic commercial ideas. So where would we apply machine learning? People throw the term around. Where do we apply data analytics? And that's really what it's about. So I'm going to touch on a couple of things that have really shared with me very quickly, like almost easy cues that I've come across around understanding the field. So machine learning is part of the broader artificial intelligence domain, which would include things like speech recognition, visual pattern recognition, and so on. And the first time I was really exposed to it, probably in a commercial way, was in the movie Moneyball, where they used the idea of Brad Pitt played the coach of a team that was doing really badly, and then the nerdy data scientist guy came along, and he started doing certain things that the coach just couldn't understand. He would pick players that on paper or from a coaching perspective seemed absolutely awful, and bit by bit the team did incredibly well until I think eventually they won the league. So if you take a look at what was happening in the underlying narrative, what we see is that human beings, even highly trained human beings like a professional coach, we are doing this thing all the time. We look for features within players, in this case, that we believe are going to be features that are telling features around the success of a particular player, or maybe customers. Will we be able to convert these customers? Will we be able to retain these customers? But often as human beings, our visual intuition is limited, and what machine learning really does is it uses a math and mathematical modeling to be able to take a look at a whole lot of these features and put together patterns that would predict a particular outcome, and then get better and better at it. So another example of this, and this really helped me a lot, was an AI company presented to inQuba a few years ago, and they used this idea of a tale of two cities. And in the two city example, what they do is they say, well, here is the deck of cards, and one of the person is the dealer, and the other person has to take the cards, and they have to put them into a particular set. And on the card is a picture of either a house in San Francisco or a house in New York, but it doesn't say where this particular house is. And all the dealer has to say to the person who is being dealt the cards is, when they put it in a pile, either they're right or they're wrong. And what happens is, as they go through this, the player gets better and better at the game, because the player starts recognizing features of a home in New York versus a home in San Fran. So let's say, for example, homes in San Fran have got pitched roofs because it rains a lot more there, and homes in New York have got features around catering for snow, for example. the person would eventually pick up that feature, but they'd only get to a percentage of accuracy before they had to look for more features. And that feature could be, for example, a chimney on the roof would be a telltale sign that it's a New York home, because it doesn't really get cold in San Fran, and you don't need fires in winter. So when you collect data in exactly this kind of way, what we're seeing is that you don't necessarily need to collect all the data. You start off and you actually move through it. And as you want to optimize what you're trying to do, you collect more and more data to kind of move forward. So those are really anecdotal examples and of setting the scene. We'll move forward into the application in custom experience management in a bit. But what I'd like is just to ask Alasdair about real life examples that Servian has worked on, and the application of those examples and the results that you've got.
Sure, thanks, Michael. So an example that I'd like to go through is one we did for an online appliance retailer. So they sold, televisions, fridges, microwaves, kettles, anything at all like that in an online space. So the channel was presenting it through a website, had a call center for taking the orders, etc. And that was their business model rather than a kind of physical space. So yeah, they were quite focused on the digital realm, and they came to us with an idea in mind of wanting to be able to better customize their website and their sales experience to the customers, so that they could address them based on their personality. Right? They want to be able to. Their use case idea was to predict the personality, so that they could then customize the site and the messaging. So the drop downs might change, the amount of detail about a certain product might be more or less detailed, the number of reviews mentioned against a certain product could change. And they want to do this, but they realized that actually it probably worked differently for different groups, and the personalities were weighted to decide this. So what they'd done in advance of us actually being engaged at all, they'd done some earlier work. They'd had some research, and they'd done some surveys to capture for a subset, the people who had completed the transaction before and had stuck around basically to answer some questions, and they basically built a profile of a handful of customers in terms of what personality profile they were like. Were they detail orientated, or were they people who preferred to trust reviews and that kind of thing. And so we worked with them to see if we could predict it with machine learning, because what would happen is if we could do this, then all the new customers coming to the website could have their personality predicted, and so the website could be customized for new customers, which were the vast majority. And the way we approached it was first by doing a kind of feasibility study, just to make sure that the data they had available was actually had some sort of information in it that could be used to detect these personality types they had defined. And we found some evidence enough to be confident enough that it was worth trying. And then we progressed, we did some design thinking exercises to try and focus the problem and understand what might matter to in a customer's journey on the site, turn that into data features, did some data science to build iterations of models until we're satisfied the performance was good enough. And then we actually went as far as deploying it into production settings. So actually the model was deployed and was reliable, and they could change the versions as they kept iterating over time.
I think the thing that I find fascinating about this case study is if you're really talking about a company that sells appliances, and the fact that you can actually take a look at data that's available of people who are looking for appliances and come out with a strong model tells you a lot about the power and the capability of these techniques in being able to offer customers a far better experience where you don't have a fortune of data around those particular customers. Can you share with us any other examples?
Yeah, so I've got another example, which is it's connected. There's a similar sort of theme going on here, but it's a different kind of use case. So this one's a FMCG pharmaceutical company, and they also wanted to know how they could better talk to their customers in the online space. But they were coming up from a different motivation originally. So their practice had been to manufacture and sell these products in stores. So make sure they had a good position on the shelves, make sure the marketing activities were strong, so the brand was strong, and then that was the sales channel. And there's a very small percentage of sales happening in the online space, which they wanted to grow. And then we were working through them before and during the start of COVID on this. And of course, COVID only, increased their enthusiasm for this shift to the digital space, and to be able to address their customers this way. So what they wanted to be able to do was to be able to talk to their customers and present information in a way that's more relevant to them. So actually, again, they had done some earlier work. They'd done some analytics type analysis of surveys to determine groups that they thought they could talk to well, such as life stage segments, for example, or fitness, or young and fit, or old and taking care of your health, so things like that. And that allowed, if they knew these groups, they could talk to those groups. And what they wanted to be able to do was, for all these customers that were increasingly coming to them through the digital channel, they wanted to be able to identify them and place them in that group so they could serve them the right content. So similar kind of setup, actually. We had a little bit of data to work with from these prior surveys, and we had to explore all their first party data coming from their website and whatever else they had, to transform into features, data features, which would be useful for various things, but especially for the machine learning model. And the machine learning model would use that data to predict for new customers which life stage segments they would, or other kind of health segment they could fit into. And part of that journey was also just to understand how much useful information was there in their first party data. Did the first party data actually contain the behaviors and things that mattered for deciding a life stage segment? And that was the real heart of the challenge.
Alasdair, we've seen many or big focus of or concentration of customer experience professionals are in financial services, insurance, and telco. We've actually applied many of these techniques that you're talking about, and I'm just going to chat to you, the audience, a little bit about some of these case studies and the utility around them. So I'll start off with insurance. We're doing a lot of work in the insurance industry, particularly the short-term insurance industry. A big requirement that we see popping up, particularly around the whole, let's call it what we're calling the new economy, or the 90% economy, is a big focus on retention. And we're working with an insurer in Australia. The use case over there is they've got an incredible value proposition, and they know it's unique. There's a lot of loyalty linked to using the insurance product, but their retention is not what they would want it to be. Retention is definitely a problem. And they've done so many studies. They've pulled together surveys, they've pulled together a whole lot of different data, but because they haven't organized the data in a way that they can work with, and we're going to talk about organizing the data in a way that actually presents a result, they cannot really get to grips with the underlying reason for this retention problem. And I think the case study that you've just gone through hints at that, because often when executives ask this question, they're looking for a silver bullet, and that silver bullet is, well, tell us about what's going on, why are people leaving. But there are often a whole lot of segments, and if you don't understand the segments and the reason behind the segments, then you can't really start solving those problems. So a lot of the work to get a good outcome relies on organizing the data really well. At least that's what we found. Other case studies that we're seeing in a number of markets that we work in, superannuation in the Australian market, investment in the US and the South African market. We're seeing that the problem of investment type products where, once again, a superannuation company would want someone to stay right through, and when they leave their current employer, they would want them to stay with that particular product instead of switching. And the same thing holds for retirement funds as well. And we've developed this idea called the emotional journey. When we actually look at the data, what we do see is that a lot of the time the problem is not in the transactional journey. It's not that you can see a customer was paying premiums, and then they stop paying, but there's nothing in the transactional journey. So we're going to talk about this idea of the emotional journey and how does the emotional state move, and where do you apply visual analytics, where do you apply machine learning. B2B telco is another example. We've built fantastic models that have a very high degree of predictability. In a model that we built during the course of last year, we actually got, it was an 85 or 87% predictability around using the data of that customer. I looked at a whole lot of features like the number of tickets that they had logged, how long they had been with, things like sentiment in the ticket content and so on. We were able to build a very powerful predictive model with a high degree of accuracy. And you've obviously covered retail. So what I'd like to do is, I hope we've given the audience a good feel for the kind of use case and application. So what I'd like to move to is, well, we've shared the kind of use case and application utility. So I think the kind of scary thing when it comes to machine learning or data sciences, customer experience professionals often kind of say like, whoa, speak to those guys, and because it just seems to be quite a scary field. So maybe you can just kind of make it a whole lot more accessible. If a company or customer experience professional comes to you and says, well, hey, we're trying to solve this particular problem, how would you go about it?
I'd love to, thanks. So at Servian, we have distilled methods to make it work quite smoothly, and to really, to make sure that the investment, I suppose, that you'd make in this space really pays off. And sometimes that means doing something very simple, as opposed to doing the most complex, sophisticated thing and being very controlled about it. But our methods, one of our methodologies is called Accelerate ML, but underpinning these methods is these mindsets, which got brought up on this slide here, which are not amazing revolutionary mindsets. They've become to be quite accepted throughout the world today, actually. You've got design thinking, lean, and agile, and each of these are somewhat related, but combined to be quite a useful guide to good practice in data science. Design thinking is an extremely powerful and flexible way to get the information you need to know, and for distilling what it is you're designing or building or learning about. Right, so it's basically, think of it like it's a grab bag of tools. There's all these creative exercise things you can do. So you can apply in workshops, activities, simulating situations to put yourself in the right mindset. All these kinds of things you can do to achieve what you need to achieve, or to discover the details of which you need to discover, so that everything's set up for success after that point. And some of the things you might do in that setting would be, just to very simply trying to consider all the problems that might be candidates to attack. So this might be one sort of general problem to do with, like, say, retention, for example, but there could be something within that specifically that's more important, like retention due to inability to complete a form, as it's a sort of out there example. And you realize, okay, let's attack this specific problem. Define it as first, realize that's the most important one, then define it really well, and then also be creative as a group to think of what are the best ideas for attacking this. And also, you apply the sort of Occam's razor principle to sort of pick the simplest one first. And that's this design thinking methodology is really very, very useful and fun, to be frank.
Well, I wish I had met you a few years ago, because when we started doing complex journey management projects, one of the initial techniques that we used, and move forward one slide, was the whole idea of using journey thinking. Well, let's define the problem very broadly and bring in a lot of data, and then use visual analytics and machine learning or prescriptive analytics to be able to look for patterns. And what we have found subsequently is that approach, there are some benefits to it, because once you're collecting data, you're kind of in data collecting mode. The only problem is that you could be collecting data that is outside of the heart of the problem, because you don't really know where the heart of the problem is when you're just collecting data. So we have over the course of the last year changed our methodology, and we've introduced these ideas of design thinking. And I think the kind of way that we've done that, particularly around journey and journey management and journey analytics, is we start off with some very, very kind of basic questions that we ask our clients, and it's very conversational in nature, almost along the design thinking kind of principles that you've spoken about. So we would say, well, what does the ideal transactional journey look like? And what we mean is you want someone to acquire an insurance product, and then from that point, a great customer would obviously download your app, and then if they are unfortunately in a collision, they would take pictures with the app and submit to them, and the whole process is digital. What we do find in the insurance industry is many times they put a lot of effort into the app, and only 15 to 20% of the customer base actually downloads the app. So we want to build almost this conversational type of model first before we even out the gates. And another thing we take a look at is this idea of the emotional state, and we bring that in very early on, because what we've seen is that it's a whole idea of inexperienced marketing. You've got to continuously market to your customers, because you want your customers to get to a particular emotional state, and that emotional state could be there's a high level of trust, or there's a high level of assurance, or there's a high level of understanding that the customer has around a product or product knowledge. So those are really emotional states, and we find that businesses focus a lot on the transactional state, but give very little credence to the emotional state. And when we ask people why they leave, it's very rarely the how question that, oh, I spoke to the call center agent, or I tried to do this and I couldn't do this. It's often around things that are, let's call it like the broader ecosystem. I don't believe this product is performing, or I don't believe this product has value compared to other products, and so on. So, or I'm not finding this product affordable. So a lot of the thinking that we are, or the feedback that we're actually hearing is around around the concept of emotion. So we do a lot around that emotional journey. Also try and develop a common understanding of what constitutes a lapse from a journey. And then there are a few other things that we do as well. We move to the next slide. We ask people, we ask a question, and we try and get a very early grip on why do people do the things that they do. Also, who are those people? Is it one group, or is it a whole lot of people? And when are they doing these things? Because the timing of when they're doing it is so important. Is it in the first month, the third month, on renewal? Because we've got to be able to manage it. we then need to take a look at, well, what would an intervention look like? And if we're going to put effort in solving this problem, is it worth solving from a customer value perspective? And what does the customer life stage and the customer life cycle look like? So a lot of that discovery work now we built into our process. So it's really interesting to see that Servian starts off with design thinking, which a lot of people see as a softer science and certainly not something that they would associate with machine learning. So I think what I'm interested in is lean and agile. Maybe you can share a little bit with us. So once you've done the design thinking, share with me what lean and agile really means.
Right. So lean here, I'm referring to like the lean startup ideas, like Eric Rie's ideas, which in turn stem from lean management from Toyota. But the build, measure, learn cycle is central to this ideology. And what it's really about is about not thinking like you've got to construct the most perfect response to the market, whether it's building the perfect algorithm or a report or a new functionality or anything. The value is in actually releasing much earlier than that, and learning from how the market reacts to it. So it's about actually building kind of MVP style products and releasing them and measuring what comes back. Like there could be real feedback directly from customer reviews or anything you can get, or just data, just measurements of responses, of uptake and things like that. That cycle is really important and just much more powerful for working your way to a really good quality product than or a really good quality model than a simple MVP. Yeah. And then agile is the agile we know as the software development agile. So this is well-established practice now, absolutely in software development, and in many companies this is now the standard way of running projects generally. And it just suits this domain far better than the sort of waterfall approach. You don't want things overly specified in advance because you don't know where they're going to go. The whole idea is that you have a concept and a hypothesis, for example, and then you learn. So agile brings this ability to adapt to change by every time you learn something new, you can reprioritize with the right person who's in charge, a product manager, can reprioritize what is really most important. You can incorporate the new knowledge and then adapt, because it's an absolutely iterative, nearly more than anything else. This basic data science is very iterative, lots of pivots, lots of changes as you work towards a solution that's going to make that impact.
So, Alasdair, you've spoken about design thinking, lean and agile. I think one of the things that I see as a customer experience professional is that a lot of the machine learning type of ideas or data science ideas kind of sit in the BI arena or with high-end data science guys like yourself. So what I'd like to share with the audience now is to actually go through a methodology specifically for customer experience practitioners on how we can apply these techniques. The other thing that I'd like to share is that not every problem will result in being a machine learning type of problem. It could be that you just need visual analytics. So what inQuba has developed is a 5-step methodology, and it's showing to be super powerful in its orchestration and in its ability, and in certain use cases, particularly ones where there's a low flow through, like credit card acquisition. The idea of banks advertising for a card, people applying for a particular card, and then taking the person all the way through that experience right to paying and using that card and putting their salary into that particular account. Those are typically low conversion rate type of journeys, and we've seen using this methodology we can push it anywhere between 80 to 100% increase at critical journey points. So the way that we do this is we start off with discover a purpose-driven journey. So that's really the transactional journey mapping. The next thing is understanding the emotional journey. What happens with the customer across the emotional journey? The part that customer experience managers are really used to, which is the how question. We can also overlay how are you doing? That's an NPS question on the journey. So we can actually physically lay the NPS on top of a particular journey and say, well, these people went this route. What is the impact of NPS on the journeys that they take? The third one step is overlaying step 1 and 2. So if you overlay the emotional journey together with the transactional journey and the customer data, what does that show you? And is there a requirement or a need for further analytics like machine learning? Step 4 is around orchestration and nudges, and step 5 is the review process. I'm going to jump through those super quickly and show how this would play out. So here's an example. This is a very basic example of someone applying for a product like insurance, and that apply via the web or the branch or agent, and that shows the flows of customers as they actually move through. Then they accept the quote. There's some documentation, and some of that is successful and some of it is unsuccessful. The client has problems with their documentation and it lands up at a call center agent. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to see what the flow of the customer journeys look like, because people are really strong at visualizing things. The next thing we want to do is we then want to overlay the emotional context. So we want to understand why people do the things that they do. And we would get that data from what we call in conversation. So something that we're doing now is, rather than surveying, we actually inject WhatsApp conversations directly into the journey, which is super exciting. And we're finding that when it's conversational, we're getting sometimes a 30% response rate compared to an 8% response rate from a survey. And we start collecting data, and you spoke about iterations. We're doing this in a much tighter cycle now, where sometimes we'll just develop a basic journey, even a paper-based journey, before even digitizing data, and we'll start that surveying very, very early in the process to say, well, what is happening over here? We want to build out as much of the story as we can very, very early on, and then we want to iterate, and we want to be able to cycle it. Step 3 is where we overlay the data from 1 and 2, and we start saying, well, okay, this is painting a particular picture here. Now, this is where we find it gets interesting. A lot of the time when we overlay the data, we're using visual analytics, so drop-down lists, searches of a particular journey path. We click on that particular path, and then based on clicking on a particular path, it isolates that segment, or sorry, not the segment, it isolates the cohort of people who have traversed that path. And then when we look at the visual analytics, it shows the segments and the detail around the particular segments. Now, that in itself can be super revealing. However, what we have found, like in the Moneyball example, is sometimes you look at it visually and it's not giving the answer, and that immediately hints, if you can't find the answer visually, it means that the secret lies in the data and in richer data, and then we would apply a machine learning model. And we've done this at a number of clients, and what we find is sometimes we don't even really understand why. And I think that's the interesting thing with machine learning. It will show patterns. It doesn't always show the how, but it will show patterns. So we can identify something like a high-risk customer group. And what we then do with that customer group is we iterate, and we ask the high-risk customer group what happened at that particular point in time, and we target surveying at them. So in step 3, we're starting to mix it up quite a bit between using machine learning to target a group of people that are high risk, and then actually asking them questions to understand their behavior better. And that would take us to step 4, whether we've identified that segment through visual analytics and the reason for it, or whether we've identified a segment through machine learning. The two do play with one another, because the first thing is we want to be able to identify the segment. We want to get a feel for what that segment looks like. So it could be high-risk people who, for example, don't see value in the product, or high-risk people who have an affordability problem. So those are the kind of things that we would look for. We then want to use machine learning to categorize people into that particular segment so that we know when they get to that point, that is the kind of campaign or orchestration that we need to serve up. So have you seen the movie The Social Dilemma? The
Yes.
Netflix documentary? Okay, well, that's kind of where I learned. It gave me like really basic insights. Obviously, companies shouldn't be doing or using this for nefarious purposes. The thing that customers really want, they always say, well, you have so much data about me, why don't you engage with me a whole lot better? And that's really what we're talking about. So that first step of using techniques like surveying or cluster analytics to identify a segment, and then using data to predict when someone's actually going to fall into that segment or that emotional state at a point in the journey. And then the last step is obviously this the cycling that we go through, or this agile approach, or these iterations that you were talking about. So you and I have discussed this before, and I'm interested in your view as a data scientist of journey management and this idea of visualizing journeys. You're a kind of guy, you look at charts and you look at data. So how do you reconcile this whole movement that's emerging around journey management as like the next thing in customer experience management to machine learning? Do we even need it?
We do, absolutely do. So consider the alternative. The alternative is all you have is just tables of data. And as a data person, I know how to query that data and select certain things and, you know, do some analysis to understand that, okay, I can see this proportion of this group or that group or this thing happened at that time or whatever. But what we're describing here is multiple touch points in a sequence, like real journeys. And the story here is about things that happen in a sequence over time. And so, like any good data scientist or an analyst or anyone, to do a good job, you have to turn it into some sort of a chart, some sort of a way to visualize it. You don't just stop at looking at the data by itself. And so visualizing these journeys as journeys and seeing how groups funnel, separate out, and what it is that characterizes them, which is really essential to be able to actually hypothesize what's going on here, what's going on there, can we do anything about it, should we start applying some machine learning. Yeah, I would say it's pretty close to essential.
Well, I think there's a really good book. It's by Yuval Noah Harari, and his first one was Sapiens, and the next one was Homo Deus, where he says, well, what will human beings look like in the future? And I think a lot of the work that we're talking about here is it really is the future's arrived in a way where human beings love looking at things and we understand things visually, and now we're getting this machine learning, which is almost this accelerator to say, well, hey, I need the machine to help me here because there's a pattern when I look at this and I can't actually see it. So it's almost enhancing our strength as human beings, which is probably a nice soft way of kind of looking at the synthesis of the two. So what I'd like to do is to kind of just wrap up and then move to the Q&A part of it. We were asked in the previous event in the series, well, we love these ideas, we had fantastic feedback, but how can we make it practical? What do we need to do to actually bring this into our organizations? And what inQuba has done together with Servian is we've got a process, and it's called Journey Accelerator, and it's really easy, and it's if there's enough interest from the customer and we can see that they're serious, we don't charge for this as well. The way we do this is through a 2-hour interactive workshop, and the reason we can do this in 2 hours is we built up very strong journey models for different industries, and we work now across most industries in journey, and we actually bring those models to the session we prep beforehand. So in that 2-hour session, what we're able to do is map a customer-specific journey, define the customer profiles, identify nudges and opportunities, identify data requirements, and quantify the ROI, which is a lot of the groundwork that's required, because we've seen companies almost need like a push start to get into this. Otherwise, the conversations can swell and they can become, you know, quite technical quite quickly. And what we deliver out of that session is an accelerator pack to start that journey discovery and pilot type of process, and that contains a high-level journey design, all of the items documented in step 2, and a journey ROI modeler. So it takes a lot of the complexity out of it, and it really it simplifies the whole approach and makes it a lot more accessible for customers. So Anthony has published the address at the bottom there, and if any of the attendees are interested in that, please just email info@inQuba.com with the subject Summit Accelerator, and we will revert to you and help you set up the session. So I'm going to hand over to Anthony now for Q&A, and just any last thoughts.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys. I found that super interesting, and I've also made a note to rewatch Moneyball. We've got a couple of questions that have come through. So yeah, I'm going to put these on the table, and you guys can tackle them. So firstly, from Chris. Thank you, Chris, for this. The question is, I expect that one of our challenges would be data availability. It's spread across the business and across systems. How do businesses overcome this?
Alasdair, do you want to take a shot at that?
So yes, that's a standard challenge, that you've got these systems, whether they're your transactional systems for your core operations, or your website, or your application, or your call center data, or anything else. All these scattered applications that have information that matter to these kinds of problems you want to solve, or these journeys that you're trying to map out. And ideally, you would bring these together. There's definitely value in doing that, and bringing that together, you know, modeling it and bring it to a central data warehouse or some other sort of architecture would enable you to do automated things. So react quickly to different events, as well as apply machine learning continuously and predict things that need to be predicted on time. But in lieu of that, you could also just use the data samples and start the insights you want to start making decisions about processes or planning. They can be based on flat files and samples and things stitched together, as long as they represent the same thing, the same journeys over time.
Alasdair, that's the identical approach to what inQuba actually does and uses. So we have found that the range of data sophistication within the client base is quite broad. Some clients have highly maintained data lakes, and other clients it's less sophisticated. So what we have built into the inQuba toolset is something called the Data Integration Toolkit, and that allows clients to get going super quickly. It's quite simple. It allows the ETL type of extractions from the various backend systems or ERP systems that clients are running. It's just a simple file extract into comma delimited type of format, and all of those files are then dumped within agreed frequency on a secure FTP server, and the data integration kit actually goes and picks up those files along the way, and it ingests them. So we've got really, for a lot of the time when we use that, clients say, well, they're actually happy to take that into a production type of environment because it solves the problem that they're trying to solve. So I think you can always put more and more effort into data and data integration, but it shouldn't necessarily be the starting point. The starting point is to solve a particular problem.
Mm-hmm.
Great, thanks guys. This next question from Emma. Thanks, Emma. Question is very interesting. Your case study mentioned personality prediction. Could this also be used to anticipate churn in other industries?
Yes. From the point of view of, while you couldn't use the model that predicted personality to predict churn exactly, but the model was built off data and data features about the customers and their behaviors and descriptions of them. So those models for both predicting a personality or segment or if they're going to churn, we're powered by the same data, with some differences. You might want a little bit extra for churn to describe more transactional type things. But in general, we're using a lot of the same data. And so what's been described here is the journey towards your own company's journey towards capability in applying ML, in that not every project requires a restart and regeneration of whole new data sets. You really are building up the capability.
That's great. Thanks, Alasdair. Here's a question from Regan. Thank you for this. We have an existing customer segmentation within the business. Is this a helpful starting point, or should we start again with ML?
Okay. So probably not. You probably should start again. Probably the segmentation is quite meaningful, and it was based on some really useful and rich data sources. The question is, what do you need to do next? Do you need to be able to see if those segments are changing, or do you need to be able to act based on who belongs in what segment in real time for some reason? Then you would want to be applying machine learning to replicate what you did earlier. But it's not a necessity that you should merely adopt machine learning to replace something that might have been done quite well in a very reasonable analytical method.
That's great. Thanks, Al. I've just got a late entry in here from Shushant, and I hope I said your name correctly. It's an interesting question. The question is, how is data science helpful for customers?
I'll actually pick that one up. I think when we talk about data science, we're talking about quite a broad spectrum. So it can be anything from visual analytics all the way through to machine learning. What we're really trying to do is we're trying to understand certain things about customers that, and the whole idea is if we could go down to, let's say, every customer and say, well, what happened with this customer? And often I work with the team in some of the high-end research that we do, and when we look through the data for a particular organization, you can look at 2,000 comments, you can look at 5,000 comments, you can look at 10,000 comments, and customers give a lot of feedback. Any customer experience professional that's on the receiving end of that feedback will see that that feedback is vast. And the thing for a customer experience professional is that they have to go back to their organization with clear answers. And I think this is going to, we're definitely seeing an inflection point where going back to the organization, and let's say you in a telco and you say, well, the customers say that the service is poor, or the customers say that the network isn't where it should be. That can't fix a problem because you want much more data around it. You want to know, for example, if a customer says the service is poor, who is this customer? How do they fit into the organization? How much business do they do with your organization? What is the value of that customer? can we apply data analytics to see the risk around that customer? So the data inherently is not a value to the customer. The orchestration, what the organization does about it, is a value to the customer. So those orchestrations typically fit into 3 or 4 main categories. The first one is what we call digital nudges. The digital nudges, we found that a lot of the time the processes inside organizations are actually really good. They're really well thought out, but customers just don't understand them. And a digital nudge is giving someone a packet of information at a point in time to help them through a process that they may not understand, and it would be aimed at a very targeted customer. Another intervention is what we would call triage, and that's something that we're using quite broadly. It happens automatically through the software, but where we see a particular point in the journey and we say, well, there are enough people flowing through that journey, so we've got good data around it, and we know that this point is worth solving. What we do is if someone has a problem, we offer them the opportunity to break out to a call center agent, or an agent will phone them back automatically. So once again, we've helped the customer get through that particular point. The third broad grouping of solutions that are being applied is where you either change workflow, you change a particular process, but the customer experience team has to have enough data to be able to go back to the business with a high degree of rigor to say, well, out of all the problems that you're solving, these are the problems that are your biggest problems, and you can actually quantify them. If you solve these problems, we'll make this amount of money. So I think the role of data is being able to aggregate, quantify, distill this mega amount of feedback that's coming from customers, and to apply orchestration strategies. But all the magic is really in the orchestration. If you have all the data and all the analytics and the company is not doing anything about it, it looks great, it feels great, but in fact, it actually doesn't do anything for the customers.
That's brilliant. Thanks, guys. I think we're going to end it there just in the interest of time. Mike, would you like to land for us?
Great. Well, I really hope it's been interesting and fascinating for the audience. I think I've learned a lot through this, and I think where we really trying to go as an organization is we're seeing a huge shift, particularly what the economist is calling the 90% economy. And this 90% economy is a theme that we've used for the whole series. Basically means that there's 10% less business. And if you take a look at some of the GDP numbers, you're getting, it's not 10% in every country, but on aggregate, it's like 7% down, and sometimes 3 or 4%, but it's big. And it doesn't matter which market we talk to customers, whether it's Australia, there's a recession which is well on the way there. I think it's 7% down. And the whole shift and the whole role of customer experience managers has really changed overnight. This was coming. We saw a level of sophistication in what the business was asking of CX professionals, but now it's more pointed than ever. So we're seeing the business come to CX professionals with some very, very tough questions, and they're questions that with the toolkits, with the methodologies, CX professionals at this point in time can't readily answer. They're often going and working with the data sciences team or the BI team or with the marketing team. Marketers could come to CX people and say, well, we need to understand how to do retention better, because it's not just good enough that we win this business, but we have to make sure that we get past the first 6 premium payments. So the role of a CX professional is really to be pivotal in this whole capability, and to have built up the data, the methodology, the tools, the capability. And we're talking about not just a project, but a living, working ecosystem, like a lab environment, where there's enough data in this lab environment and you can continuously augment it to be able to answer these questions with a high degree of accuracy and a high degree of data. So we call this a Level Up CX Summit to really share what we know, and as well for inQuba to learn, really to help the CX community level up to the next level that we're seeing in a post-COVID environment. And obviously, comfort and accessibility with data analytics, how to get data, how to use data, the application of machine learning is absolutely pivotal to this. So we hope we've managed to share what we've learned with the audience, and that it's been an hour well spent.
It's great. Thank you, Mike. I'd like to thank all our attendees today. Thank you for giving us your eyes and your ears for an hour today. We do so appreciate that. Please keep an eye on your inboxes. We will get the content through to you. And thanks to our speakers, Alasdair and Mike. You guys have been great, very interesting. Alasdair, any final thoughts? 20 seconds.
For this final thought, I think I'd like to point out the harmony of looking at the journey as analysis piece for discovering opportunities for ML, and that those opportunities can be quite easily attained. They could be quite simple little things you can do. They don't have to be the most complex thing.
Brilliant. Mike, anything from you?
I like Alice's point, and I'll echo that. I think collecting data in a journey framework is a great way to kind of kick off. And it's not a case of collecting data for the sake of collecting data. It's really a case of being able to start with the visualization, get a level of comfort, and then really build it out. So you start building out this journey repository, and you can kind of move and you can pivot and you can and you can build on it rather than just seeing it as like a one-off project where you're doing a piece of work and then you kind of saying, well, oh, okay, that was the result. And we can clearly see at inQuba that this is absolutely the future of customer experience management will be in managing the journey with using data and a high level of comfort around the data.
That's brilliant. So thank you once again to all our attendees, and enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you at the next one. Cheers.
Thank you very much.